In every life, there are ups and downs, disappointments and comebacks. But it's been said your hardest times often lead to the greatest moments of your life. Let's have ourselves a pocket sized pep talk because there's one common thread found in those who make successful comebacks, and that's positivity. Who better to talk about positivity than a guest who knows plenty about comebacks and positivity? I sense a pep talk coming our way.
A Pocket Sized Pep Talk, the podcast that can help energize your business and your life with a quick, inspiring message. Now, here's your host, Rob Jollis.
Today's guest, Dr. Courtney Beck, is an adjunct professor at Florida State University and founder of PoP, Plenty of Positivity. She's a former elite gymnast competing at the University of Florida, where she became an NCAA All-American and was a member of 2 SEC championship team titles. She earned a PhD in sports management and an MBA from Florida State University, a master's degree in communication from the University of Central Florida, and a bachelor's degree in advertising from the University of Florida. Your academic titles rival your gymnastic titles. Happy to have you with us and welcome to the show, Courtney.
Rob, it is an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me today.
Well, truly, it's a pleasure to have you here. I wouldn't have you here if I wasn't looking at your bio and things, and it really kind of caught my eye because I love this topic. So let's start there, and I want to hear more about this comeback. You were an elite gymnast, you walked away from the sport for 3 years, and back you came. I sense a good story here. What made you walk away, and then what made you turn around and tumble on back?
Absolutely. So my passion for the sport of gymnastics began at such an early age. So about, mom and me classes, if you will, competitively would start around the age of 5 to 6 years of age. And I just gravitated towards the sport. The idea of 4 events, basically almost like 4 sports combined in one sport, there was always something to be working on, whether it was just having more grace, that strength, flexibility. There was always something to work on. And I think that's what really drew my attention to the sport early on. Well, of course, as you climb any sport, as far as upwards to an elite level, naturally injuries occur. And there I was. I made it to the international elite level in gymnastics. And that came, of course, with 5 to 6 hours a day, 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And it just took a toll ultimately. And I had an elbow injury. Ultimately, I would decide to walk away from the sport just due to breakdown of my elbow, just overall body. And then 3, 4 years later, I was in high school and I just missed the sport so much. I did not ever put it out that I would not try to make a comeback. It always kind of sat in the back of my mind. And so at that point in my life, I'm entering my senior year. It's springtime, and it was just something that came along my mind that was like, you should try. This is your last try to basically come back to the sport as far as collegiate gymnastics. And so I did. I went back to my club gymnastics coach, and it was hilarious because he's like, Courtney, how is this actually going to happen? You've been out for 3 years. I have sometimes like difficulty with gymnasts that are out for even 2 weeks, a month. How are you going to do this? But I had the plan, Rob. I knew exactly how I was going to start. I was not going to look at the big picture too much of trying to compete in all events, but try to gain my strength back. And one event to the other. So I was like, okay, Jeff, this is how it's going to work. I always loved beam. So maybe I go for beam and vault. Those were the 2 that I started out with. Well, at that point, I had the game plan. I was probably 4 months into the comeback. And lo and behold, just goes to show sometimes the impact that sports can have on our bodies. My elbow started acting up again. So I knew if I was going to be serious about this comeback as I would enter into University of Florida, I would have to get the surgery. So got the surgery in summer. I knocked on the head coach at that particular time, Rhonda Fain, and I told her, I was like, I'm so passionate about this sport. I would be so grateful for the opportunity to walk on to the team. And of course, there was an actual like tryout process. And there I was, Rob. In 2006, I was a walk-on to the University of Florida gymnastics team.
And what year were you in at that point academically?
Yes, so I was just a freshman
Mhm.
entering University of Florida. I
Okay.
was, to that very point, talk about a life transition. You are entering college, you're getting to meet more people, of course, more friends. Academics is intense, not to mention pairing that up with athletics. But I'm all about, I'm high energy, Rob. So I
Oh, you
really,
are? You're high energy? I would not have known that, but keep going. Wow. I have to make a note of that. All right.
love that idea of all my hours were taken during the day, whether it was, like I said, in class, study hall, we would have strength and conditioning, training, but I just thrived on just that pressure again of competing. And I was so incredibly grateful for my coach, Ron DeFane, for allowing me this opportunity.
Yeah, I'm as you're talking, I'm sort of thinking almost like a musician. There's the kids that are told to play an instrument, and it's a chore, and then there are those that I have three kids as an example. All three took piano lessons. Two of them, it was a chore, and they went through 3 years or whatever it was, and one of them crossed the line of not only enjoying the instrument but going to the instrument for support when she was sad, when she was struggling. The piano became her friend, and so all of a sudden, training or practicing for her wasn't a chore. She was looking forward to it. And in listening to you, it sounds like gymnastics was sort of that way to you. It was a respite. It was a place to go to be strong again. Not you weren't forced to do it. You wanted to do it.
Oh, absolutely, Rob. And to that very point, my coaches talk about a support system. They were basically my second family. Those girls were the sisters I never had. And so that special bond, I mean, like I said, 5 to 6 hours a day, you literally become family. And on top of that, I must say that sport, the level of intensity that is required, I loved being under that structure. And
Yeah.
I think that's what I thrived on was the structure, was the fact, like I said, you could always be getting better at something. You never ran out of things to get better at or to perfect. And so I really did. My father was a great supporter. He never forced me to go to gym. He never asked me like, "Hey, did you get work on that skill today? Did you get it down? Like, are you going to be competing in all these events?" It was more of he took like a step back and was more the support system that I needed. And it wasn't like, I think if my father was more involved or too involved, you're right, I probably would have kind of been more standoffish towards the sport. But truthfully, from the start, I was that was the first sport that I had fallen in love with. I did tennis. I did some other sports even throughout high school, but I always came back to that sport of gymnastics.
Yeah, that's exciting, and it must have been really just almost a heartwarming story. It almost sounds like a hallmark. There's the famous stories of like James J. Braddock, the boxer, who actually left the sport due to injury, worked on the docks and for a few years and actually strengthened his body again. Got into, they just plugged him into a fight because a boxer canceled and he ended up becoming champion of the world. And they couldn't believe it, but his body kind of healed itself just walking away from the sport. So as you're speaking, I'm thinking it's almost like that boxer story for you.
Absolutely. And one thing I could definitely say was those 3 years that I was out of the sport, the amount of demand, and like I said, this is for any sport, but obviously just particularly pertaining to my experience, but the demand and the pounding on one's body, especially in the sport of gymnastics, I really do feel it was a blessing for me because during my collegiate years, I was able to thrive. I was able to build from my freshman year. My head coach had allowed me to gain my strength back. And I really feel in the sport of gymnastics, if you could lay that foundation again, getting your strength back, your skills are all like, it's basically muscle memory.
Yeah.
Everything starts kicking in again. And like I said, you add passion on top of that. And it was just the perfect match. I was so incredibly grateful because, truthfully, Rob, if I did not get into the University of Florida academically, I would have never really considered walking back onto any team because I was fixated on the University of Florida. And I think another thing that's really impactful is visualization. When I was 8 years old, my club coach would put us all in a bus. He would bus us from Orlando to Gainesville to watch the University of Florida Gator girls compete. And I had that in my mind. And one day I was like, Courtney, I want to be a Gator gymnast. And so I think that's what kind of always stuck too in the back of my mind was the passion and the drive to be a collegiate gymnast. And it was that consistent visualization that helped me get through those 3 years of being out of the sport, finding my love and my drive again for that sport, and then
Yeah.
just going after it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not unusual to find good athletes, and you're kind of an elite athlete. We're not just, it's not a club level we're talking about a walk on at the university. It's not unusual to find them actually successful in business because you share that word discipline. There's a discipline to what you do. So it's not, it doesn't surprise me that you're disciplined as an athlete. It's not like you turn it off and go, well, I only do that when I'm on the balance beam. It's the way you probably approach driving a car. I mean, it's just who you are. So, and in business, I find that the more successful people, it's not a slam dunk, but it sure helps, have this discipline that they apply. So let's slide you over to business a little bit right now. And before we started the podcast, Courtney and I were talking, and we were talking a little bit about training, and I think you appreciated a conversation we were having just about sort of anybody can learn a product. There's no real discipline there. I think you can actually just take the manual and sort of go to a closet somewhere and look at it. But learning how to get somebody to want that product and what to do after they want it, that's where the discipline comes in because there's a process. Talk to me about a little bit about sort of how you approach yourself outside of sports and apply that discipline to your goals.
Absolutely. And that is what I love about sport is the lessons that are certainly transferable into your professional career. So, Rob, just like you were saying, I had experience. I was in corporate for about 3 years in pharmaceutical sales in particular. And you're right, the level of discipline, of understanding perseverance. How many no's do you get before you get a yes? And the patience. I'm still working on that though. I'll be honest with you on that one.
Join the club. That's a never-ending struggle for us all. So that all that was honesty. Keep going.
But it really was. It was that idea of perseverance, of even going back to my story in gymnastics and understanding that every day, if you exert that effort, that hard work, eventually that hard work will in fact pay off. And so, regarding sales, when I first got into it, I just want to give a shout out to my first manager, Bart. He was absolutely fantastic. And I will say, probably after that first week of doing that first ride along, he was probably like, oh, wow, what did I get myself into? But you're right. I mean, when you go to training, for example, this is what I at least found through my personal experience was that you're learning a lot about the product itself. And yes, you do the role play, but at the end of the day, something that I learned that was extremely valuable after those 3 years was the relationships that you build with people. And anything after that is going to be, like I said, obviously you're selling the product, you have a purpose there, but you really do have to get to know the person, understanding that emotional intelligence as well as body language. I became very like clear about one's, especially in those offices. It's always, stop and go. And a lot of people tell me, hey, he's super busy today or she's super busy. You may want to come back. And even though my agenda was to go in there and I had something to sell, it was realizing that once again, if you're patient, you may actually get more time in the end and not forcing yourself on somebody in sales.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, I'd like to share a story with you just to pick up on that point, because that's a really important one, Courtney. I was interviewing Tom Ziegler, Zig Ziglar's son. And I said, I just sort of was throwing a question out randomly. I said, if you go back and do anything differently, what would you do? And he said, I'll tell you exactly what I do. He said, I sat with people that were pretty important people around our dinner table. You imagine who Zig had around that table, presidents, major CEOs. He said, and I just always assumed that those relationships would stay intact. And the reality is they don't. You have to continue to pursue and stay with that network, or it gradually and gently and quietly slides away. So I love the point you made. And I thought Tom made a really good point of, yeah, I see it in my career. I'm 32 years as a professional speaker. I wish somebody had whispered that into my ear 32 years ago, because I was, we get into a role and we figure, well, I'll always be rolling like this. No, people change, corporations change, structures change. And we have to be diligent to apply that discipline that you said to maintain our network.
Absolutely. And one thing that, as you were speaking, it reminded me of when I do think about my first manager, he legitimately like laid the foundation for my professional career once I was out of at that time, I got a master's in communication, but I was brand new to the professional like workforce, let alone pharmaceutical sales. So he educated me on the industry that I was about to enter, let alone understanding the product that I was selling. And that is something to this day, I still stay in touch with him. And that was, my gosh, I don't even know how long ago that was, 10 something years. But it's to that very point when somebody offers you an opportunity or opens a door for you. That is something that I never forget, because I know as the years go on, you would not be able to achieve maybe certain success if it wasn't for that very first person that opened that door.
Yeah, I agree. And pharmaceuticals are interesting. In my career, I was sort of thinking as you were speaking. I know I've worked with Lilly, I've worked with Bristol Myers Squibb, Mallinckrodt, a couple companies, just company dropping. But I will tell you one thing I learned about the pharmaceutical industry. I'm curious if you found this to be true, because it depends on what you're selling into who. But boy, never did I meet an industry where they needed to really learn how to open a sales call, because frequently they're walking backwards down a hallway talking to a doctor. Okay. They've got from meeting room 3 to meeting room 7 to get at what they need. And unfortunately, some of them would, use that time to throw as much product information as possible. And others would use that time to give them, kind of a what's in it for them, to find another time where they can sit down and talk. But what about you? Did you find it challenging trying to get the ear of, basically the decision makers?
No, good question. So I learned very quickly, like we had been speaking before, not to force yourself
Right.
and to go along your agenda. They know why you are there, but being mindful literally of the surroundings, the environment you're in. Is it very busy that day? And being observant, I mean, also to finding common interest. If you have the possibility of being able to be like even like close to their office and you see a degree on the wall and you find common, hey, you're from University of Florida too, you graduated there, me too. So finding that common interest, but to that very point, never pushing that product right away, even in that situation where they were at least allowing you time, but you knew at the end it was going to be like a 30-second pitch, but saying, I think it would actually be a better time maybe for me to come back. Why don't we go ahead and do that? And I really do believe in my experience that actually helped me win in the end,
Right.
because they respected the fact that you respected their time.
Right. Yeah. And when I would go out on calls, that's what I was picking up. You're the subject matter expert, Courtney, but I was the observer. And that's exactly what I was watching, which was, boy, the best way to kill this account is to go, oh, well, don't have much time. I'm just going to pitch, pitch, pitch. And it didn't work. One other thing you said that was interesting, you would sort of look on the wall and find, a common interest. Did you ever look on the wall, and I mean that almost like a metaphor, look around
Mhm.
and try and find the personality of the individual. In other words, is this a person that wants to schmooze, or is this a very dominant individual that will actually appreciate me not schmoozing? Could you pick up on that?
So this is actually an interesting story. So Rob, my first position at my first company, I was a floater for a woman on maternity leave. So they sent me to Philadelphia. My whole family is from Pennsylvania in general. I never grew up there. I went there, summers for, to see my grandmother, so to speak. But my point in saying that is I learned very quickly a lot of the doctors in that particular region, if you will, very straightforward, get to the point, and they respected that more. However, about 2 months later, I was supposed to be there for 6 months, but the position in Tallahassee, Florida opened back up. And I'm going to be honest with you, not to go on like a side tangent, Rob, but I learned very quickly about driving in snow, and I hit black ice, and it was in the heart of winter in general. I was literally in my hotel for 4 days. So when they said, hey, there's a call or there's a position in Tallahassee, Florida, I'm like, send me there. So, all of that to say, though, going back when I did come back down to the South, so to speak, I did see that some physicians were more willing to offer you the time to get to know your story, especially if you were obviously brand new too. But that time constraint, they really did want to get to know you. So I did realize, I guess, different regions and just understanding the personality and having that emotional intelligence to understand what environment you're in and what the doctors actually do prefer as far as even like in a conversation.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. Because I think we've hit all three now, which is we also have to know geographically where we are. And these aren't these. No, listen, there are a lot of social people in Minnesota, okay? But, and I love people from Minnesota, but if I'm a gambling man and I have to actually put a bet down on the table, I'm going to say probably a little bit of a lower reactor and, pull back on the energy and excitement here for right now. So I think what you've reminded us is that, again, everybody's different, but geographically, we're also going to get an indication of just how we're going to have to match that pressure. Courtney, I've been asked at times, I know it's odd, but twice I've been asked this question: how hard should I shake a person's hand? And the answer is as hard as my hand's being shook. I'm matching the pressure. So if you got a good firm handshake, I'll give you a good firm handshake. But if it's an easier handshake, I'm coming in easier. And I use that when I'm looking at personalities. I'm trying to match that pressure, so to speak. But geographically, we've got some indicators there. We got a head start. Let's put it that way. So, yeah, good, very good points. And you have to do that quickly in pharmaceuticals.
Oh, well, and just to your point, you're right. The time is limited. And
Right,
so are we going to be starting out the life conversation of get to know Courtney, or are we getting to business right away? Because I
right.
could switch, the literally switch the flip right away, and understand that they want to talk business right away versus Courtney, tell me about gymnastics, and then we'll get to the product.
Yeah, love to. I saw it. I saw a doctor one time who came in, and I thought it was one of the greatest openings. And because sometimes we don't know. Do you want me to talk about gymnastics? Or are you the kind of person that really just wants to hear about the product? I'm looking around. I'm trying to pick up on every clue. And this guy walked in and he said to me with a big smile, because I had something on my eye he wanted to look at. And he said, you want me to look at the eye and then we'll schmooze, or you want to schmooze and then I'll look at the eye? And I almost wish, in a sense, that we more people would do that in business, because that's kind of the way to figure. If you don't know, and you want to see somebody smile, ask them that question and they'll tell you, let's talk about the product and then I want to hear about such and such. Or no, I'd love to hear more about you and then we'll talk about your product. But who's to know? There are no directions, which, you know,
And when you talk about just being, like metaphorically, like on the wall, like if you could spot something that would give you that clue. Another thing, if you did not want to be direct, you could also be essentially indirect by asking technicians or if there was other assistants in the office, because that is exactly what I did. Most of the time when I would walk into an office for the very first time, you probably were not really going to get to the physician at that point. You had to actually understand their schedule too. So understanding that, it was a good thing, because
right,
then you were able to ask just how the office is managed. If you ever did want to come in and do an event like an actual lunch, to be able to educate the doctor on the medication, when is that good time? And then, like I said, getting to know the doctor through that. So it's almost like an indirect way. So you're not being as forceful or direct, but then also too, you're also getting to know the whole office, which of course, as we know, at the front, those are the gatekeepers. You're not going
right,
to get to the back if you do not know everybody and how just the whole office works. So.
right, right. And you know that classic whiff 'em, what's in it for me? I think too often again, we learn in sales training, okay, it's in it for you, more productivity, better product, acceptance. But the gatekeeper, that's not their whiffle, what's in it for the gatekeeper to allow you in there? And, maybe you can improve this or speed that up or simplify such and such. But again, we have to figure out who we're talking to and what's in it for that particular person, not what's in it for the doctor. That comes once we're let through the gate. So it's important. Yep.
It's so true. And you're right, like taking like the me, what's in it for me out of the equation, because I had multiple offices tell me when reps would actually get dismissed from an office, it was that simplistic fact of I have to be here and I need a signature right now, versus, whoa, this is not about you. So
Right.
when you take that out of the equation, and I think that's even a good point, just even in life, of thinking about other people and having that mentality of being selfless versus selfish, because a lot of problems, I think, just in life do stem from more of a selfish type of either personality or just that idea of approaching life in a selfish way versus a selfless way and helping others, because it ultimately comes full circle.
Well said. And circling back, and then I'm going to shift over to positivity in a second. But shifting back, it's one of the arguments I've always had against the personality models, the Myers-Briggs, the discs, etc. And I've got trainer certified in them. It's not that I don't like them. It's that they're of little value if somebody doesn't speak up and say, and remember, now that you've taken this assessment, enjoy it, show it to your kids, and put it in a drawer somewhere. Because I don't care about your personality when you go to that doctor's office. I want to know the personality of the doctor. And if you're social and the doctor's analytical, poof, you're now analytical,
So true. And you're right. Like you reminded me of something when my manager would come along, we would actually discuss before we even did the call, what is this office like? How do you approach the physician? Literally, like personality. And what was the last call? What did you guys leave off at? Because that's so important. Like if you continually restart the same conversation over and over, even though yes, you have like probably upwards to sometimes 100 offices and you're talking to so many different people, but think about that personal aspect too, that our conversation meant enough to you to remember it of where we left off before we move forward. And I think that's like when you make it special to that person, and just even in life for that matter, remembering their name, just the simple fact of a name, it can make it so much better. But yes, I mean, we always did that before. So when he went in, he legitimately saw the picture basically that you had painted before and how you were going to approach the doctor.
Outstanding. Yeah. All right, let's move you back to your POP, your POP, your plenty of positivity, which I really think because we've got entrepreneurs listening, we've got salespeople listening, and because I talk about it all the time. I interview them all the time. I got some professional speakers listening. Oh, positivity. Is there a more important topic than positivity? I don't care whether you're out there playing tiddlywinks. You better be positive about it. Talk to me about your journey into this, because there's guys like me who go, I'm positive. And then there's people like you and say, good for you. I'm actually making a science of it. I'm taking it, I'm trying to process this. I love processes. Talk to me about your version of plenty of positivity.
Absolutely. So to first begin, I am certainly not a psychologist by any means, but this idea of positivity truly stemmed from my time in sport. And I learned about that positive mindset and truthfully how powerful the mind is to creating the reality that you would like in life. And so, plenty of positivity came about just about a year ago, actually. I started developing just the concept of it. So, of course, the main theme being positivity, but truthfully, like you said, how that could resonate to a variety of different industries that one may be in, but then also, too, how that positive attitude, maybe when you start a day and it doesn't start off so great, but how when you focus, you choose, you have an active choice every day to turn that positivity button on.
Yeah.
And that is something that I saw that was really, that's what made it be the main theme of my business, plenty of positivity. But then just the mission, being dedicated to building a positive community for a better tomorrow. And so I have a multitude of different backgrounds. When we talk about the podcast, we talk about life lessons, sport lessons, and career, but we always end on a positive note. That's the common theme of the podcast.
Good. And I don't do a whole lot of guesting, but I did say I'm going to be on your podcast if you'll have me. So now I got a head start. I better end strongly. Okay. Talk to me about what's the name of the podcast?
Yes, so plenty of positivity with Courtney Beck. And as I mentioned, like the three main themes, if you will, is life, sport, and career. And so
Okay.
we talk about just the lessons that one can maybe learn growing up in sport, how they've transitioned those lessons to their career.
Hmm.
And then, like I said, I mean, even the one thing I have noticed with regardless of what industry you're in, that human element and how we could relate to each and every one of, everybody around us is we all have a chance to focus on positivity. We have that common element of we've gone through struggle. Inevitably, you will come upon challenges in life. And so being able to build that community and pull people together at the end of the day, regardless of where you are on the hierarchy, so to speak, what titles you have, that common denominator are those human elements, struggles, challenge. How do you overcome adversity? And that's basically pulling people together.
Excellent. Well, bump you back a notch. Uh,
Mhm.
I love what you said, in terms of, we got to, remind ourselves to be positive. But it's almost like, I want to stand up straight. And I can certainly stand up straight until I walk by a mirror and go, who's that? Neanderthal. And so I'm looking for triggers sometimes in sales. As a speaker, my trigger is a lightning bolt. I wear one when I speak. I usually put one on my notes because every time I catch it, it reminds me, come on, put the throttle down. Let's go. Uh, is there a trigger for positivity? Because we all want to do it, but I think we forget. How do we trigger ourselves?
I would say, I mean, at least from my personal experience, it would be, like I said, it's a choice. People talk about
Mhm.
even, we've had discussions about this idea of like toxic positivity. And by no means is that what this is. I mean, the truth be told, I have bad days. But like I said, I think what I have learned, at least throughout my life, is it's a choice. It's an active choice that if in fact your day does not start off as the way that it was planned, that you have an active choice to make that day, much better at the end. But I view life each day as a gift. And how could I help others in that day? And how could I maximize what I give back to others? And if I just stay within that kind of bad attitude, if you will. I'm not really magnifying or amplifying the opportunity that I have to positively affect other people. So that's just like one example, if you will. But like even in business, like if we're talking about sales, you don't get that first sale, the second one doesn't go through, and you're seeing like a repetitive action. That is when I take time to go back in solitude and think about becoming self-aware. How am I coming off to people? Is there something that I could change that could alter ultimately my day of to be positive and to have a positive outcome? So I don't know necessarily like a specific like trigger per se, but I really do. I think it comes back to a choice, an active choice to be positive in one's life.
Yeah, but when you just mentioned kind of pull back into solitude, in a sense, that's your version of a trigger, okay? Okay, I'm catching myself. Now I have a process move that I make. Courtney, can you fake positivity? Is there value in faking it?
I mean, I think
I'm pushing you hard on this
this
positivity.
is these are very good questions, Rob. When I reflect, I think it reminds me of authenticity. I mean, you could tell right away if somebody's being fake and trying to like cover it up. So when you talk about positivity, I think to a certain extent that it's that choice that even though yes, the reality is my life's not going so well here at the beginning of the day, but that no, I have so much to be grateful for. That idea of gratitude, in my opinion, would be that closest way of getting to positivity because it opens a new perspective. So I don't know necessarily about being able to fake positivity, but I think that there are actual ways that could lead you to positivity that ultimately could make your day better. But I think gratitude is a key.
Yeah. And I think the word fake is a bad word. I wish I hadn't used it. Because like you said, some days we wake up and it's like, it's just, not every day is a 10 out of 10. And yet we have to perform. When you speak professionally, if I give 100 talks a year, obviously there's a whole bunch of them. I can't wait to take the stage, but there's always a couple where I'm doing all I can, but it's sort of like, you're doing your routine the best you can, but your body's going, hey, Courtney, this is it today. This is what I'm going to give you. I mean, you can keep like a horse, you can keep hitting me with that crop, but this is as fast as I can run. And I'm really running as hard as I can. So it's not a matter of faking it. It's sort of a matter, and that's where your gratitude comes in, where you say, well, hold on. We could always bounce back and find something that kind of puts energy back in the battery. For you, it's gratitude. I'm with you on that one. I'll give you a quote. I use it every now and then, but it still makes me smile. It came from Carol Burnett, of all people, who was on the Howard Stern show not that many years ago, and he was asking her something, and she said, I tell in a sense, with my mind, I tell myself I can do this. I'm terrified, but I can do it. She has terrible stage fright. I don't know if you knew that, but she said, but the neat thing is, the body doesn't know when the mind is acting. That was her quote, and I really sat and went, wow, is that ever accurate? And so sometimes I guess what I'm saying is when we find that gratitude that you're speaking of, the body will begin to produce what it needs to produce because it doesn't care that you're, pretending right now, and pretending might be the wrong word, but sort of just grasping. It says, hey, I'm feeling this energy now. I'm back. Let's go.
Rob, you brought up a key word, energy. Um, there is something to be said about energy. Like I said, there's no physics background whatsoever over here, but I could definitely tell when I'm thinking positive in the morning. I love journaling, for example. So even if there's things on my mind that are starting to kind of cloud your vision, so to speak, as soon as I put like pen to paper and I start thinking about being grateful for what I have upwards to this point, but then also you're right, visualizing, even if in fact it is a far-fetched dream, nobody has to know it's in your journal, right? But you're right, the mind is so incredibly powerful. And I do believe if you envision yourself, if it is a certain position you want in a job, if it's a certain place that you want to be 6 months from now, but you continually envision those characteristics, how to get to that position, embodying that position, if you will. I do think that there's something to be said about that. And I would love to, like I said, go more into like psychology with somebody who's educated on that in that area. But energy and just how powerful the mind is, I do think that, I mean, just throughout my life, I've witnessed that.
Yeah, I've actually experimented with it. I had a petri dish that I worked from for about 15 years of hundreds of people who were in career transition. And I would be assigned cases and I asked for, I don't want to work with anybody who's been unemployed for less than 3 years. So the more of the chronic situations. And there was a lot of visualization there. Currently, they were visualizing, I've been told no for 3 years. Well, I'm sure that really puts that energy right in that battery for you. But what if we go back 5 years? Close your eyes and just tell me about that. Remember the time where every time you asked for something, it came your way? Remember when you knocked on clients' doors and they all said yes, and you could feel them changing? Well, I want elevator pitches. I want star stories. But how about before we go into that next interview, take your mind there. Play that back. Now walk in and answer some questions, but sometimes we have to move it around a little bit. I don't want to think about the last three losses. I don't care if I got to go back a year. I want to think about the last three wins.
That's a good point because it makes me think of when one stands too long in their past mistakes,
Mm.
how that could really cloud where you're headed. Because there was so many times, I mean, just even in life, different, spots of my life, so to speak, or different points, but where I look back and if I could remember feeling tension, anxiety, all like low vibrational states of mind, if you will, it was a common occurrence of every day you were waking up just with a negative mindset. And I could remember, like, specifically when I had time to just go outside and walk with no earphones on. This is what I'm referring to is when I was finished with my program just recently in December of 23. But it was this idea I had time to think for myself. I could focus on just even like, I know this sounds kind of silly, but like being out in nature, I could hear my thoughts so clearly and I could envision what I would like for my future to be. And so taking it back to journaling and having a consistent positive perspective, I was amazed when I started this business of the amount of supportive people that have helped me. I mean, even just developing skills, if you will, building confidence, literally to be on a podcast, providing encouragement on the side from people some of which I just met on LinkedIn. And so I thought about that. I took time, like, what was the difference in that state of mind that created literally my reality? And what was the difference when I was struggling, when I was anxious, when I just wasn't myself? And how did I turn that around? So you're right. I think it's sometimes taking a step back, not living in the past, but then how did you get to where you're at, where something positive happened? What was that like light bulb moment or that thought process that switched to creating a reality that you would like to live?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to throw a rhetorical question at you because I already know the answer. When you got back at it and you're at the University of Florida and you've walked on and now you're competing, I can't believe for a minute that they called your name and you stepped up to the balance beam and went, okay, let's take ourselves back to the worst routine I've had in the last year. Okay, let's go. No, you're taking yourself back to the best routine you had, and thank goodness you did. So I think that we can transfer this into business. I got to let you go, but I can't let you go without jumping into one more thing, and that is you're journaling. You're talking to somebody who is also a journaler. So give me 30 seconds on your journal. I'll tell you 30 seconds about my journal, and then we'll start wrapping us up.
Okay, well, I could just tell you as far as journaling goes, to me, it's in the morning when it's completely quiet. I envision my short-term goals. I also take inventory of where I'm at in the process of those short-term goals becoming long-term goals, and ultimately self-reflecting once again on, am I developing into the person that I want to be from literally like the last 6 months to where I'm at today, and how can I be a better person even just day by day? So it's taking personal inventory, but it's also looking at those short-term and long-term goals.
Oh, you're kicking my journal's butt. You're very self-actualized. I am because I'm in a performance-based career. I'm very pointed towards going out and what I'm thinking in an airplane as I head to a gig, so to speak, and then reflecting back when I finished. And 28 years later of journaling, I've got quite a number of stories and events, but I think where we meet is when we write it down as opposed to thinking about it, we become what I call more methodically observant. When you transfer it and you spend the time that you're spending, you spend more time than I do. But when we spend that time, we keep things from just evaporating. All of a sudden we've captured a thought. And I'll let you nod. I hope I'm going to get a yes to this, but isn't it fun when you journal and you think you have little to say, that those become almost the most productive journaling events, because then the mind is really discovering.
Oh, most certainly. I
Yeah.
mean, I love even looking back in time of understanding what I wrote then, and even 6 months later, certain things have legitimately come to fruition. So the power of putting pen to paper, there is something to be said about visualization and setting those short-term and long-term goals. Rob, I am all about journaling.
Yeah, me too. Well, welcome to the party. Okay. All right. So give us, listen, it's been delightful. I really have enjoyed the conversation. You hit a home run. About 90% of my guests are authors, which means you got to go out and get that book written, by the way. I see a POP book coming out. But I just picked up an energy actually from just looking at your LinkedIn site. And I said, I think I want to hear about that. How do people get a hold of you?
So good question. So simplistically, even by email, so Courtney at plentyofpositivity.com. Just as you mentioned, I am on LinkedIn. That is the main platform that I have the business on. So please reach out to me. I would love to connect that way. I'm also on Instagram as well as X too. So email and social media platforms, I would love to hear from you.
Perfect. And Courtney can be spelled a few different ways. So tell everybody how you spell it.
Good point. So it's the traditional name. So Courtney.
It was the NEY I was looking for. Good. All right. All right. So now we know how to get a hold of you. And the podcast is called one more time.
Plenty of Positivity with Courtney Beck.
Yeah, what a shocker. I wouldn't expect it to be named any other way. Look, it really has been just a thrill talking to you. I've totally enjoyed it. Learned a bunch. Love the way you were able to kind of dance between not only positivity, but really applying it to business. And I just thank you so much for being on the show. It's been great.
Rob, it has been an absolute honor. And thank you so much for having me. I've truly enjoyed this time spent together.
Great. Well, we'll do it again as well as we can next time, everybody. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and recommend it on iTunes, Outcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information on this show and Rob at jollis.com.